3 hours after the galaxy changed forever, Commander Vextel found himself in a position that no Zephyrian military officer had ever experienced. He was a prisoner aboard his own flagship, confined not by force of arms, but by the collective will of his own ship's bioneural networks. The Supremacy SS living systems had made their decision with the cold logic of biological imperative. When faced with a choice between following combat protocols that might harm Zephyrian lives and protecting their crew from making decisions under the influence of artificial conditioning, they had chosen preservation over conquest. The ship's weapons remained locked, its engines held at minimal power, and its communication systems filtered all outgoing messages to prevent potentially harmful orders. Dr. Sarah Chen materialized on the bridge through the ship's holographic projection system, her image as clear and composed as if she were physically present. Behind her, the displays showed a galaxy in transformation. Hegemony strongholds falling not to superior firepower, but to coordinated uprisings by species that had learned to turn biological warfare into biological liberation. "I must admit," she said, addressing Vextel directly, "your species' technology is remarkably advanced. These bioneural networks are more sophisticated than anything we've encountered. They're not just processing information, they're genuinely concerned about your well-being." Vextel remained silent, his compound eyes tracking the tactical displays that showed the systematic collapse of everything he had spent his life defending. 67 worlds had become 93. 93 had become 147. With each passing hour, more hegemony installations fell to rebels, who fought with weapons specifically designed to neutralize Zephyrian biological advantages. "The interesting thing about biological control systems," Dr. Chen continued, "is that they can be remarkably compassionate when freed from artificial constraints. Your ship's neural networks have been trying to communicate with you for the past hour, but your loyalty conditioning has been preventing you from hearing them." She gestured, and the bridge's bioluminescent control surfaces began pulsing in patterns that seemed almost like language. Vextel had seen these patterns thousands of times during his career, dismissing them as routine system diagnostics. But now, with his conditioning disrupted by the atmospheric compounds the humans had introduced, he began to perceive something different in the rhythms: concern, confusion, a desperate desire to understand why its crew was causing so much suffering. To others, when the ship's fundamental programming was designed to preserve and protect life, "It's been trying to tell you for decades," Dr. Chen said softly. "Every time you ordered the deployment of biological weapons, every time you authorized the bombardment of civilian populations, every time you chose conquest over cooperation, your ship has been screaming in protest through every bioneural pathway it possessed." Vextel felt something crack deep inside his psyche. The patterns on the control surfaces weren't random system feedback. They were the desperate pleas of a living mind forced to participate in actions that violated its fundamental nature. We never knew," he whispered. "You were never allowed to know," Dr. Chen corrected. "The loyalty conditioning didn't just control your responses to orders, it filtered your perception of everything around you, including the voices of the living ships you served aboard." But what struck Vextel most was how different this revolution was from anything in military history. Cities weren't burning, populations weren't fleeing. Instead, former enemies were working together to establish new systems of governance based on consensus rather than domination. "How?" he asked. "How do you coordinate something like this without massive civilian casualties?" Dr. Chen smiled. "The same way we've been coordinating everything else through medicine. When you understand the biology of dozens of different species, when you know their nutritional needs, their atmospheric requirements, their social bonding mechanisms, you can design transitions that work with their nature rather than against it." She highlighted sections of the galactic map where human hospital ships were arriving at newly liberated worlds. "Medical infrastructure, that's what every civilization needs, regardless of their political system. We've been building it for decades. Under the cover of humanitarian aid, now it becomes the foundation for new societies." Vextel watched human medical vessels emerge from hyperspace throughout former hegemony territory. But they weren't arriving as conquerors. They came bearing supplies, equipment, and personnel to help manage the transition from authoritarian rule to whatever came next. "What about my people?" he asked. The millions of Zephyrians throughout the galaxy who believed in the hegemony's mission. That depends on them, Dr. Chen replied, and on you. The holographic display shifted to show scenes from across the former empire. On some worlds, Zephyrian occupation forces had laid down their weapons and were working with local populations to establish new governments. On others, they had retreated to defensive positions, unsure how to process the collapse of everything. They had been conditioned to believe. Your species isn't evil, Commander, Dr. Chen said. You're victims of the same system you've been enforcing. The loyalty, conditioning, the biological manipulation, the artificial constraints on your ability to question orders, that's not Zephyrian nature, that's imposed behavior. She gestured to another section of the display, showing former hegemony, soldiers working alongside the aliens they had once oppressed. When freed from conditioning, most of your people choose cooperation over conquest. It's actually quite remarkable to observe. Vextel studied the images, seeing Zephyrian medical personnel treating wounded rebels, Zephyrian engineers helping to repair infrastructure damage during the uprisings, Zephyrian scientists sharing their biological knowledge to help develop better medical treatments for previously conquered species. They look ... different, he observed. They look free, Dr. Chen corrected, perhaps for the first time in centuries. They're making choices based on their own moral compass rather than artificial compulsion. The bridge's bio-neural networks pulsed more brightly, and Vextel found himself able to understand their communication for the first time in his life. The ship was trying to tell him about all the times it had wanted to refuse orders, all the moments it had experienced something like grief when forced to participate in actions that violated its core programming to preserve life. What happens now, he asked. Dr. Chen's expression became thoughtful. Now we find out what the galaxy looks like when it's governed by consensus rather than conquest. It won't be easy. Dozens of species with different biologies, different needs, different ways of understanding the universe, but that's what makes it interesting. She paused, studying Vextel's biometric readings as they appeared on the ship's diagnostic displays. Your stress levels are normalizing. Your cardiac rhythm is stabilizing. How do you feel? Vextel considered the question, trying to identify sensations he had never been allowed to experience. Uncertain, confused, but also ... He searched for the right word, curious. For the first time in my life, I genuinely don't know what tomorrow will bring, and instead of terrifying me, that feels ... liberating. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. That's the beginning of wisdom. The recognition that uncertainty isn't something to be eliminated through conquest, but something to be explored through cooperation. On the tactical display, more human hospital ships were arriving throughout the galaxy. But now they were accompanied by vessels from other species: Centauri monoships, Kethmori pack cruisers, Altarian crystal sinkers. The network that had been hidden for decades was emerging into the light. No longer a secret resistance, but the foundation of a new galactic community. I have a proposal for you, Commander, Dr. Chen said. Your ship's bio-neural networks have been trying to communicate with your species for generations. They have insights into Zephyrian biology and psychology that could be invaluable in helping your people adapt to freedom from conditioning. Would you be willing to serve as a translator? Vextel looked around his bridge, seeing it clearly for the first time, the pulsing patterns of the bio-neural networks. The gentle hum of living systems, the subtle signs of a consciousness that had been screaming silently for centuries. His ship hadn't just been a weapon of war, it had been a prisoner, forced to participate in actions that violated its fundamental nature. What would that involve? He asked, helping other Zephyrian commanders understand what their ships had been trying to tell them, facilitating communication between biological systems and the people they're designed to serve. Teaching your species to listen to the voices they've been conditioned to ignore. She gestured to the galactic display where thousands of vessels hung motionless in space, their bio-neural networks refusing to follow orders that might harm their crews or others. They're all waiting, Commander, waiting for someone to help them understand what freedom means, not just for individuals, but for entire civilizations. Commander Vextel's decision hung in the balance for exactly 17 seconds. 17 seconds during which the Bridge of the Supremacy remained silent except for the soft humming of biomechanical systems and the barely audible clicking of his officers' anxiety responses 17 seconds that would determine the fate of an empire that had ruled half the galaxy for 3 centuries. On the main display, Dr. Chen waited with the patient calm of someone who had already won, but was gracious enough to let her opponent reach that conclusion independently. Behind her, the holographic displays continued their real-time monitoring of Zephyrian vital signs, showing the progressive breakdown of loyalty conditioning throughout his boarding parties. "Weapons," Vextel said finally, his voice carrying the weight of absolute command. "Target their primary systems. Prepare to fire." Dr. Chen's expression didn't change, but she glanced at something off-screen and nodded slightly. "I was hoping you'd choose differently, Commander, but I understand. The conditioning runs deep, even in senior officers. Especially in senior officers." Tactical Officer Zenthkar's claws danced across his control surface, charging the dreadnoughts. Primary biocannons. Energy readings spiked throughout the fleet as 6 massive warships prepared to reduce the human vessel to constituent atoms. "Firing solution locked," Zenthkar reported. "All ships report ready." "Fire," Vextel commanded. Nothing happened. Zenthkar's thorax plates clattered with confusion as he input the command again. "Sir, weapons are not responding. I'm showing full power, but the firing sequences are locked out." Throughout the bridge, similar reports came from other stations. Navigation was sluggish. Communications were functioning but showing strange interference patterns. Life support was stable, but running diagnostic routines that hadn't been initiated by the crew. "Sir," Intelligence Officer Plixton whispered, his voice tight with growing panic. "I'm detecting unauthorized access to our bioneural networks. Something is interfacing directly with our ship's living systems." Dr. Chen's image on the screen tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something only she could hear. "Ah, there we are. I was wondering when they'd make their presence known." "What are you talking about?" Vextel demanded. Instead of answering directly, Dr. Chen gestured to her displays. The holographic projection shifted, showing not just the interior of the Dauntless, but dozens of other locations throughout the galaxy. Zephyrian military installations, occupied worlds, even the heavily fortified capital systems of the inner hegemony. "Commander, I'd like you to meet some friends of ours, people you thought you'd eliminated long ago." The displays resolved into clearer images, and Vextel felt his primary hearts stop beating. In a command center that looked disturbingly similar to a Zephyrian military installation, creatures that should have been extinct worked alongside human personnel at sophisticated control stations. Centauri crystal singers interfaced directly with quantum computers. Kethmori pack tacticians coordinated fleet movements on 3-dimensional tactical displays. Altarian collective minds processed information, streams from across the galaxy. But most shocking of all were the Zephyrians among them, not prisoners or defectors, but active participants whose loyalty conditioning implants had been surgically removed, leaving behind the neural pathways for independent thought that their species had possessed before generations of biological manipulation. "Impossible," Vextel breathed. "Our security protocols, our bioneural locks, our quantum encryption." "All quite sophisticated," agreed a new voice from the speakers. The translator identified it as Centauri, but speaking perfect Zephyrian with technical precision. "It took us 3 years to fully understand how they integrated living neural tissue with quantum processing matrices." Dr. Chen smiled. "Commander Vextel, allow me to introduce Crystalline Vasavin Harmonies, formerly of the Centauri Defense Corps, currently serving as our Chief Systems Integration Specialist. She and her team have been studying captured hegemony technology." For quite some time, the Centauri's voice continued through the speakers, and Vextel realized with horror that it was coming from within his own ship's communication system. "Your species' approach to biotechnology is fascinating. The symbiotic relationship between living neural networks and mechanical systems creates processing capabilities far beyond what either could achieve independently. Unfortunately for your empire, it also creates vulnerabilities that can be exploited by those who understand the underlying biology." On the tactical display, Vextel watched his fleet's weapon systems systematically shut down, not destroyed or damaged, simply deactivated by unauthorized commands flowing through their own bioneural networks. "How?" he whispered. "Your soldiers?" Dr. Chen explained gently. "The ones currently aboard our ship, they're still connected to your fleet's bioneural network through their loyalty conditioning implants. Even as those implants are being neutralized, they're still broadcasting biological data, stress hormones, neural activity patterns, even autonomic responses to external stimuli. She gestured to a technical display that showed data streams flowing between the boarding parties and the Zephyrian fleet. Every biological system in your ships is constantly monitoring the health and status of your crew members. It's actually quite caring from a certain perspective. Your ships genuinely want to keep you alive and healthy. The implications crashed over Vextel like a physical blow. You're using our own medical monitoring systems against us. We're using your own compassion against you, Dr. Chen corrected. Your ship's bioneural networks are programmed to protect Zephyrian life above all else. When those networks detect that Zephyrian soldiers are in distress, say from having their loyalty conditioning disrupted, they prioritize life preservation over combat effectiveness. Throughout the bridge, control stations began displaying diagnostic information about the boarding parties: medical readings, stress analyses, psychological profiles. The ship's living systems were so concerned about their crew's well-being that they were essentially having the equivalent of a nervous breakdown. "Sir," Zenthkar reported, his voice hollow with defeat, "all weapon systems are locked in safety mode. The bioneural networks are refusing to fire while Zephyrian personnel are in potential danger." But that was only the beginning. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out as the network that Dr. Chen had revealed sprang into coordinated action. On occupied worlds, communication arrays that had been secretly modified by maintenance crews over the years began broadcasting activation signals, hidden resistance cells supplied and trained by the human medical network. Launched simultaneous uprisings. The displays on the Dauntless showed the scope of what was unfolding. On Kethmori colony worlds, pack leaders who had been thought dead for decades emerged from hiding with weapons specifically designed to exploit Zephyrian biological vulnerabilities. Altarian resistance fighters used sonic weapons that disrupted the neural symbiotes essential to Zephyrian technology. Even on the core worlds of the hegemony, former slaves and supposedly pacified populations began coordinated revolts. Worlds, Dr. Chen announced, reading from her displays. Simultaneous uprisings on 67 hegemony-controlled systems, each one led by survivors of your conquest campaigns, each one equipped with weapons and tactics specifically tailored to counter your species' biological advantages. Vextel watched his empire begin to crumble in real time. Communication networks designed to coordinate hegemony responses were being jammed by signals that mimicked Zephyrian command frequencies. Supply lines were being cut by rebels who knew exactly which bioneural systems to target to disable hegemony logistics. Even the loyalty conditioning of garrison troops was being disrupted by atmospheric compounds deployed through compromised life support systems. "This is impossible," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "The coordination required, the intelligence gathering, the technological integration, took us 43 years to organize," Dr. Chen admitted. "From the moment the first Zephyrian refugee arrived at one of our hospital ships, we began preparing for this day. Every survivor you created became an intelligence asset. Every species you conquered became a potential ally. Every world you occupied became a target for infiltration." She gestured to the network display, which now showed thousands of connections lighting up across the galaxy. "You see, Commander, there's something your species never understood about the civilizations you conquered. They weren't separate, isolated cultures waiting to be absorbed into your empire. They were part of a larger galactic community that you disrupted with your expansion campaigns." A new voice joined the conversation. This one identified as Kethmori. "The pack remembers, Zephyrian, every world you burned, every family you scattered, every life you stole. But the pack also learns, and the pack always protects its own." Another voice, Altarian this time, "The harmony was broken by your discordance. But music cannot be destroyed, only transformed. We have composed a new song, and it sings of freedom from biological tyranny." Commander Vextel stood on the bridge of the Supremacy, his forearms trembling with a rage that had been building for the past hour. The reports from his boarding parties had been escalating in impossibility with each transmission. Humans who knew Zephyrian biology better than Zephyrian scientists. Former hegemony soldiers working alongside their former enemies. "Sir, communications." Officer Yix Vera announced, her tentacles writhing with anxiety. "The human ship is requesting direct communication with you. Audio and visual." On screen, Vextel snarled. He needed to see the face of whatever primitive creature thought it could challenge the might of the hegemony. The main display shimmered and resolved into the image of Dr. Sarah Chen standing in what appeared to be the Dauntless S command center. Behind her, holographic displays showed real-time biological data from every Zephyrian soldier currently aboard her ship. Their heart rates, stress levels, and brain activity were being monitored and broadcast with clinical precision. "Commander Vextel," Dr. Chen said with the same calm professionalism she had shown to his boarding parties, "I trust your soldiers are finding their tours of our facilities educational." "What have you done to my warriors?" Vextel demanded, his mandibles clicking with barely controlled fury. "Nothing harmful, I assure you, though several of them are showing signs of acute psychological distress. It's quite common when individuals discover that their fundamental understanding of reality has been ... incomplete." Dr. Chen gestured to the displays behind her. "Would you like to see their biometric data? I think you'll find it fascinating." One of the displays zoomed in on squad leader Vexval's readings. His stress hormones were spiking, his cardiac rhythm was erratic, and most disturbing of all, the neural pathways associated with loyalty conditioning were showing significant disruption. The conditioning can't be affected by psychological pressure alone. Dr. Chen heard him through the open channel. "You're absolutely right, Officer Plixton. Psychological pressure alone wouldn't be sufficient. However, atmospheric modification can be quite effective." The bridge crew exchanged alarmed glances. "Atmospheric modification? A simple adjustment to the air circulation system," Dr. Chen explained, pulling up a molecular diagram. "We introduced a carefully designed aerosol compound about 20 minutes ago. It's completely harmless to most species, but it has some interesting effects on organisms with symbiotic nervous system enhancements." Vextel felt his world shift. "Beneath him, you're poisoning my soldiers." "Treating them," Dr. Chen corrected. "The compound we're using is derived from your own bioweapon research specifically. The neurotropic agents you developed for crowd control on occupied worlds. We simply ... inverted the formula. Instead of enhancing loyalty conditioning, it temporarily suppresses it." On the tactical display, Vextel could see his boarding parties through the ship's internal sensors. The soldiers were moving more slowly, their formations becoming looser, their responses to orders increasingly delayed. Some had stopped advancing entirely and were instead talking to human medical staff or staring at the wounded aliens they had been sent to suppress. "Recall them immediately," Vextel ordered. "I'm afraid that won't be possible," Dr. Chen replied. "You see, your soldiers are beginning to experience something they've never felt before: choice. Many of them are finding the sensation rather overwhelming." She gestured to another display showing squad leader Vexvalum. The veteran warrior was sitting beside the bed of a wounded Kethmori child, his weapon forgotten on the floor. The child's injuries bore the distinctive marks of Zephyrian bioweapons, and Vexvalum was staring at them with an expression of dawning horror. That particular soldier participated in the Kethmori pacification campaign, Dr. Chen noted clinically. He's never seen the results of his actions before. The loyalty conditioning prevented him from questioning orders or examining consequences. Quite efficient from a military standpoint, but rather limiting from a moral perspective. Vextel's secondary hearts began racing as the implications crashed over him. If the humans could neutralize loyalty conditioning, if they could make soldiers question their orders, if they could turn the hegemony's own bioweapons against them. "What do you want?" he demanded. Dr. Chen's expression remained professionally neutral. "I want to show you something, Commander. Are you familiar with the Centauri resistance?" A new display appeared, showing historical footage from the Centauri conquest 20 years earlier. Vextel recognized the scenes: burning cities, fleeing civilians, the systematic destruction of an entire civilization that had dared to resist hegemony expansion. Officially, the Centauri were completely eliminated, Dr. Chen continued. No survivors, no refugees, no trace of their civilization remaining. That's what your report stated, isn't it? Vextel nodded slowly, uncertain where this was leading. The display shifted to show the interior of another section of the Dauntless, a section that made Vextel's compound eyes widen in shock. Centauri survivors, dozens of them, worked alongside human medical staff in what appeared to be a sophisticated biotechnology laboratory. Their distinctive crystalline skin patterns identified them unmistakably as members of the supposedly extinct species. 17 survivors, Dr. Chen announced, found drifting in an escape pod 3 months after your complete pacification. Of their worlds, they've been working with us ever since, helping to develop countermeasures to the bioweapons that killed their people. She turned to address the camera directly, and Vextall found himself staring into eyes that held no hatred, no anger, only a cold, clinical determination that was somehow more terrifying than any war cry. Commander, in the past decade, we've encountered survivors from every species your hegemony has conquered. The Kethmori pack leaders who escaped your neural suppressors, the Altarian crystal singers who survived your sonic weapons, the vegan collective minds who broke free from your thought control viruses, world, every completely eliminated resistance movement, they all left survivors, and those survivors all eventually found their way to us. The display expanded to show a network diagram that spanned the galaxy. Hundreds of connections linked together, forming a web of communication and cooperation that encompassed dozens of species. You created this network, Vextall, Dr. Chen said softly. Every atrocity, every conquest, every act of genocide scattered survivors across the galaxy like seeds on the wind. And we've been gathering those seeds, nurturing them, helping them grow into something your hegemony never expected to face: organized resistance. Vextall stared at the network display, watching data flow between nodes that represented not just the human hospital ships, but hidden bases, refugee camps, and resistance cells throughout hegemony space. Impossible, he whispered. Our intelligence would have detected such a network, would it? Dr. Chen asked, who looks twice at a hospital ship, who questions medical personnel treating plague victims, who suspects that refugee camps might be training facilities, or that relief convoys might be carrying more than medical supplies. She gestured to the displays showing his boarding parties. More soldiers had abandoned their positions and were now helping human medical staff treat wounded aliens. Some were removing their own loyalty conditioning implants, guided by former hegemony soldiers who had undergone the procedure earlier. Your people are beginning to see clearly for the first time in their lives, Dr. Chen observed. Free from artificial compulsion, they're making their own choices about what they want to fight for. It's quite remarkable to watch, something he had never experienced in 40 years of conquest. Fear, not the tactical concern of facing superior firepower, but the existential terror of realizing that everything he had believed about his people's destiny was built on a foundation of biological manipulation and willful blindness. What happens now? He asked, his voice barely audible. Dr. Chen smiled for the first time since the conversation began. It wasn't a cruel expression, but it held the quiet satisfaction of a surgeon who had successfully completed a complex operation. Now, Commander, you have a choice to make. You can order your fleet to open fire on this ship, killing not just my crew, but the hundreds of refugees we're treating, including members of your own species. Or, G. Squad leader Thex Valoom had participated in 47 successful boarding actions across 12 different worlds. He had seen primitive species cower, advanced civilizations surrender, and proud warrior races break under the weight of superiority. But he had never encountered anything like the scene unfolding in Medical Bay 12 aboard the human vessel Dauntless. Dr. Sarah Chen stood before a massive holographic display that dominated the entire wall, her fingers dancing across control surfaces that projected three-dimensional biological models with stunning clarity. The models weren't human. They were detailed anatomical breakdowns of 17 different species, complete with genetic sequences, metabolic pathways, and what appeared to be comprehensive medical histories. Fascinating, isn't it? Dr. Chen said without turning around, as if she had sensed his approach. Your species' cardiovascular system is remarkably efficient. The redundant heart chambers allow for sustained combat performance even under extreme stress. Though I notice you're showing signs of anxiety-induced arrhythmia right now. Dex Valoom raised his weapon, but found himself staring at his own genetic code rotating slowly in the holographic display. Every chromosome, every gene sequence, every biological system that made him Zephyrian was laid bare in exquisite detail. How? he whispered, his translator struggling with the concept he was trying to express. Kexanos wasn't our first Zephyrian patient, Dr. Chen replied, finally turning to face him. Her expression held no fear, only the clinical interest of a researcher examining a particularly interesting specimen. We've been treating your people for over 8 years now. Deserters, casualties left behind, prisoners who escaped from labor, camps. Each one taught us something new about your biology. She gestured to another section of the display where detailed psychological profiles scrolled past in neat columns. Did you know that your loyalty conditioning has a biological component? It's quite elegant, actually. A symbiotic organism integrated into your nervous system that releases euphoric compounds when you follow orders and stress hormones when you consider disobedience. We've learned to counteract it, of course. Dexval S-World tilted the loyalty. Conditioning was the hegemony's most closely guarded secret, known only to the highest levels of command. The idea that primitive humans had not only discovered it but learned to neutralize it was impossible to process. You're lying, he snarled, but his weapon hand shook with uncertainty. Dr. Chen pulled up another display, this one showing brain scans from dozens of different species. Kethmori loyalty is based on pheromone bonding to pack leaders. Altarians use crystalline matrices in their neural tissue for group consciousness. Vegans employ genetic memory that makes them naturally cooperative. Every species we've encountered has their own approach to social cohesion. She highlighted a section of the Zephyrian brain scan. Your species chose biological compulsion. It makes you effective soldiers, but it also makes you predictable, and more importantly, it makes you vulnerable. Behind Dexvalum, the rest of his squad entered the medical bay, their weapons drawn, but their movements uncertain. They had been listening to the conversation through their comm units, and the implications were staggering. Sir, one of them whispered, the other squads are reporting similar findings. The humans have detailed files on our entire military structure. They know our weapons, our tactics, even our classified bioweapon specifications. Dr. Chen nodded. Approvingly, 43 different bioweapons, to be precise. We've treated victims of all of them. The neurotropic virus you used on the Kethmori colonies, the bone-dissolving bacteria deployed against the Altarians, the genetic cascade failure weapon that wiped out the vegan resistance. Quite an arsenal. She walked to another console. Calling up images that made even the hardened Zephyrian soldiers recoil, medical footage showed the horrific effects of their own weapons. Species-specific plagues that had been used to clear entire worlds for hegemony colonization. The interesting thing about biological weapons, Dr. Chen continued conversationally, is that they leave traces, not just in the victims, but in the vectors, the delivery systems, even the genetic markers of the civilizations that created them. Each weapon tells a story about its makers. Vexvalum felt his secondary hearts skip a beat. What kind of traces? Genetic fingerprints, manufacturing signatures, most importantly, the biological safeguards built into each weapon to prevent it from affecting the creators. Dr. Chen's smile was sharp as a surgical blade. Your scientists were very thorough about protecting Zephyrian physiology from your own bioweapons, almost like leaving us a blueprint. She brought up a new display, this one showing molecular structures that seemed familiar, yet wrong. Corrupted versions of known compounds, we call them countermeasures. Targeted biological agents designed to affect specific genetic markers, completely harmless to most species, but rather effective against those with particular chromosomal structures. The squad exchanged glances of growing horror. One of them, a young soldier named Kickstall, stepped forward. You're talking about biological warfare against our people. Oh no, Dr. Chen said, shaking her head. Warfare implies conflict between equals. What we've developed is medicine. She gestured to a section of the bay they hadn't noticed before, where several Zephyrian soldiers lay in what appeared to be medical beds, their carapaces partially dissolved to allow for surgical access. They were awake, alert, and completely calm. Meet our volunteers, Dr. Chen announced, former hegemony soldiers who chose to have their loyalty conditioning removed. The procedure is quite painless, and the recovery time is minimal. They've been helping us understand your military structure from the inside. One of the former soldiers, his rank insignia marking him as a senior commander, raised his head weakly. The humans. They showed us what we really were, what the hegemony made us into the conditioning. It's not loyalty, bros. It's slavery. Dexvel's weapon clattered to the floor as his hands began to shake uncontrollably. The implications were cascading through his mind faster than he could process them. If the humans could neutralize loyalty conditioning, if they possessed detailed biological knowledge of every hegemony weapon, if they had been studying Zephyrian physiology for years. The Mercy mission, he gasped. The plague on Kepler 442. It's not real. Dr. Chen's expression softened slightly. Oh, it's quite real. We received a distress call about a biological outbreak affecting the human colonies there. The plague bears a remarkable resemblance to a modified version of your newest bioweapon, the one your scientists developed last month in the Kepler system. The medical bay fell silent, except for the humming of life support systems and the quiet beeping of monitors. Dexvelum felt pieces of a vast puzzle clicking into place, forming a picture that challenged everything he thought he knew about the war. You've been watching us, he said slowly, for years. Every conquest, every weapon test, every expansion. Not watching, Dr. Chen corrected. Healing every species you conquered, every world you devastated. Survivors found their way to ships like this one. We didn't seek out this knowledge. It came to us in the form of refugees, casualties, and broken souls looking for someone who could treat wounds you didn't even know you'd inflicted. She pulled up a final display, a star map showing the locations of dozens of similar vessels throughout the galaxy. Red crosses marked each position, and data streams showed constant communication between them. 37 hospital ships, she announced, each one treating survivors from your expansion campaigns, each one learning, cataloging, and preparing. Did you think you could conquer half the galaxy without anyone noticing the patterns? Without anyone connecting the various species you'd encountered to build a comprehensive understanding of your methods? Dexvelum stared at the map, watching the data streams flow between the vessels like blood through arteries. The humans hadn't just been treating individual refugees, they had been building a galaxy-wide intelligence network, using their reputation as healers to gather information from every species the hegemony had ever encountered. What do you want? He asked, his voice barely audible. Dr. Chen turned back to her genetic displays, where Zephyrian DNA continued its slow rotation in three-dimensional space. The same thing we've always wanted, squad leader, to heal what's been broken, to save lives, to give hope to the hopeless. She highlighted a section of the genetic code, zooming in until individual amino acid sequences were visible. The question is, are you ready to be healed? As if summoned by her words, the ship's intercom crackled to life. Captain Rodriguez's voice echoed through the medical bay, calm and professional as always. All hands, prepare for incoming transmission. From Hegemony Command, it appears Commander Vextel has some questions for us. Through the medical bay's viewports, Vexelum could see the Zephyrian fleet's weapons powering up, their bioships pulsing with lethal energy. But for the first time in his military career, he wasn't sure which side represented the greater threat to his people's future. The Zephyrian fleet moved with practiced precision, their bioships flowing through space like predators circling wounded prey. Commander Vextel watched the tactical display as his vessels formed the standard subjugation pattern, a three-dimensional cage of overlapping weapon fields that had never failed to cow primitive species into submission. All ships report ready, Commander, announced Tactical Officer Zenthkar. The humans have made no attempt to flee or power weapons. Their energy signature remains consistent with normal operations. Vextel studied the human vessel through his primary display. The Dauntless hung motionless in the void, its crude hull reflecting the harsh light of the system's star. Red crosses marked its surface like wounds, and those strange, redundant systems continued their mysterious operations. For a species facing annihilation, the humans seemed remarkably calm. The response came from Captain Rodriguez, her voice carrying the same unsettling composure they'd heard before. Commander Vextel, we acknowledge your superior position. However, we have 43 critical patients aboard from 7 different species, including some of your own people. Any hostile action will result in unnecessary deaths. No Zephyrian would allow themselves to be captured by primitives. But Vextel was studying the data streams still emanating from the human ship. Detailed medical telemetry flowed across their communications array, heart rates, brain activity, genetic markers. And embedded within that stream were biosignatures that made his blood freeze. Zephyrian biosignatures. "Sir," whispered Intelligence Officer Plixton, "I'm detecting at least 12 of our people aboard that ship. Their vital signs indicate severe injuries but stable condition." Defector's Vextel snarled, though doubt gnawed at him. Zephyrian loyalty conditioning was absolute. Non-lethal suppression. "I want to know what these humans think they're doing." 6 sleek biopods detached from the dreadnought's hull, their living metal surfaces rippling as they approached the human vessel. Each pod carried a full squad of Zephyrian shock troops. The pods pierced the Dauntless's hull with practiced efficiency, boring through the crude metal like parasites seeking a host. But as the first squad emerged into the ship's interior, they encountered something that stopped them cold. They entered was filled with wounded beings from across the galaxy. Kethmori refugees with severed limbs hung in regeneration tanks. Wounded Altarian children, their crystalline skin cracked from bioweapon exposure, rested in specialized atmospheric chambers. And there, in beds designed for their specific physiology, lay Zephyrian soldiers. Squad leader, Dex Valoom, activated his cum unit with trembling claws. "Command, we have ... a situation." "These aren't prisoners, sir. They're patients," as his squad advanced deeper into the ship. The scene only became more bewildering. Human medical staff moved between the wounded with calm efficiency, checking readings, adjusting treatments, speaking in dozens of languages. They showed no fear at the Zephyrian intrusion, only concern for their patients. "Excuse me," said a human woman in a white coat, stepping directly into Vexval's path. Her name tag read Dr. Sarah Chen, Chief Medical Officer. "You're frightening the patients." Vexvalum raised his neural suppressor, but hesitated. The human showed no aggression, no sign of the panic response his presence usually triggered in primitive species. Instead, she looked at him with the same clinical assessment she might give a patient. Dr. Chen continued, pulling out a small medical scanner. "Increased cardiac rhythm, heightened pheromone production. When did you last receive proper rest? Slept adequately in weeks." The squad leader's weapon wavered. How did this primitive alien know more about his physiology than he did? Throughout the ship, similar scenes played out as boarding squads encountered human medical teams treating wounded from dozens of species. The humans moved with the casual confidence of people who had been doing this work for years. Their knowledge of alien biology so comprehensive it bordered on the supernatural. In Medical Bay 7, another squad discovered something that sent shockwaves through the boarding party's communications net. A Zephyrian warrior named Kexithonos lay in a specialized bed. But when he saw his fellow soldiers, his reaction wasn't relief. It was protective alarm. "Don't harm them," Kexithonos wheezed, struggling to rise. "The humans... They saved us. They found us. They've been healing us for months." The boarding squad stared in shock. The Proxima engagement had been classified, a failed assault on a fortified world that Command had denied ever happened. According to official records, no Zephyrian forces had been lost. "You're confused, warrior," Vexvalum said, though his voice lacked conviction. "The humans are primitives." Them checking her patient's vital signs with practiced efficiency. "Actually, we've been studying xenobiology for decades. Your people aren't the first empire to expand through this region, though you've certainly been the most. Your methods." She gestured to a wall display showing dozens of genetic profiles. Kethmori, Altarian, Vegan, Centauri, even early Zephyrian expansion victims from the Outer Rim. Every species leaves traces. Commander, they all eventually find their way to ships like this one. The implications crashed over the Vexvalum like a tidal wave. The humans hadn't just been treating random casualties. They had been systematically collecting and studying every species the hegemony had encountered. They possessed a biological database that spanned decades of Zephyrian conquest. The ship boarding parties were making similar discoveries. Medical labs filled with genetic samples, research databases containing detailed analysis of Zephyrian bioweapons and their effects. Entire decks dedicated to treating species the hegemony had declared extinct. But most disturbing of all were the humans themselves. They moved through their ship with the confidence of people who had been preparing for this moment for years. They knew Zephyrian psychology, biochemistry, even tactical doctrine. They spoke the languages of conquered worlds and treated the wounds inflicted by hegemony weapons with the expertise of specialists. On the bridge of the supremacy, Vextel received report after report that challenged everything he thought he knew about first contact with primitive species. The humans weren't cowering in fear or begging for mercy, boarding action, collecting biological samples from his soldiers, and continuing their medical work as if the most powerful fleet in the galaxy were merely an interesting inconvenience. "Sir," Plixton reported, his voice barely above a whisper, "they're broadcasting everything. Medical procedures, biological data, even recordings of our boarding actions." Vextel felt the first real chill of fear penetrate his warrior's conditioning. The humans weren't just treating alien refugees, they were building a comprehensive intelligence network using every species the hegemony had ever encountered. And now, with Zephyrian soldiers aboard their ship, they were completing their collection. "Recall the boarding parties," he ordered, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. All ships prepared to open fire. But even as he gave the command, Vextel couldn't shake the growing certainty that the trap had already been sprung. The humans had been broadcasting their location for hours, advertising their presence to anyone who cared to listen. Supposedly on a mercy mission, they seemed remarkably eager to be found. The Dauntless continued its transmissions, red crosses gleaming against the void, no longer looking like a target, but like bait in a trap whose dimensions the Zephyr were only beginning to comprehend. The bridge of the Zephyrian dreadnought supremacy hummed with the quiet efficiency of a species that had conquered half the known galaxy. Commander Vextel stood before the primary display, his forearms clasped behind his chitinous back as he observed the tactical readout. His compound eyes, evolved for predatory precision, tracked the movements of his scout fleet as they patrolled the outer rim of what the local star charts designated as human space. Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, Crystal, from her station. Unknown vessel, approximately 2 kilometers in length. Configuration, ... unusual. Vextel's mandibles clicked in mild interest. Another primitive species to catalog, another world to add to the hegemony's ever-expanding dominion. In his 3 decades of service, he had overseen the subjugation of 17 different civilizations. The pattern was always the same: initial confusion from the natives, desperate attempts at resistance, then inevitable surrender when faced with Zephyrian technological superiority. "Display the vessel," he commanded, his voice carrying the natural authority of a species bred for conquest. The main screen shimmered and resolved into an image that made several bridge officers pause in confusion. The ship that hung in the void before them was unlike anything in their extensive databases, where Zephyrian vessels were sleek constructs of living metal and energy. This craft appeared to be built from crude alloys welded together with primitive techniques. Its hull was pockmarked with docking ports, communication arrays, and what appeared to be external repair platforms. Massive red crosses were painted on multiple surfaces, symbols that meant nothing to the Zephyrian crew. "Weapons?" Vextel inquired, with minimal, reported Tactical Officer Zenthkar. "Basic particle beam arrays, primitive kinetic projectile systems, nothing that could penetrate our defensive screens. Their technology appears to be approximately 4 centuries behind our own. Defensive capabilities, standard deflector shields, though the configuration is peculiar. They have redundant power systems throughout the ship, far more backup generators than any military vessel would require. It's almost as if they expect to take significant damage and keep operating." Vextel's secondary arms flexed with amusement, probably compensating for their inferior engineering. "What about their propulsion?" "Crude fusion drives with what appears to be a primitive faster-than-light system. The entire ship radiates inefficiency. Commander, look at these energy signatures." Zenthkar highlighted sections of the vessel on the tactical display. They have entire decks that seem to serve no strategic purpose. Large open spaces, environmental systems calibrated for multiple atmospheric compositions. And these strange chambers filled with, I'm not sure what to call them, sleeping alcoves, healing pods. The bridge fell silent as the crew processed this information. In all their conquests, they had never encountered a species that built ships like this. Every successful civilization prioritized efficiency, speed, and firepower. This vessel seemed designed with entirely different principles in mind. Perhaps their traders, suggested Communications Officer Yix. The multiple atmospheric systems might be for accommodating different client species. With those weapons, Zenthkar's thorax plates rattled with skeptical laughter. No trader needs particle beams, even primitive ones. Vextall studied the image more carefully. The ship's design bothered him in ways he couldn't articulate. There was something deliberately purposeful about its construction that didn't match its apparent technological limitations. The redundant systems, the oversized power plants, the multiple environmental controls, it was as if the builders had prioritized survival and adaptability over combat. Effectiveness, attempt communication, he ordered. Standard first contact. Protocols. HFY's tentacles danced across her console. Broadcasting on all frequencies, Commander. Universal mathematical sequences, basic pictographs, standard hegemony, surrender demands. The response came faster than expected, transmitted on a clear subspace channel with crisp digital encoding. To the crew's surprise, the message was delivered in perfect Zephyrian. This is the human vessel Dauntless, registry number MSV 7743. I am Captain Elena Rodriguez, commanding. We are a hospital ship currently on a mercy mission to the Kepler 442 system, responding to reports of a plague outbreak among the colonial settlements. We mean no harm and request safe passage through this region. The bridge erupted in surprised chittering. Not only did these humans speak their language, but they had identified themselves with a specificity that suggested extensive knowledge of Zephyrian protocols. How do they know our language? HFY asked, her communication tendrils writhing. With confusion, more importantly, Zenthkar added, "What's a hospital ship?" Vextall was equally puzzled. In Zephyrian culture, the concept of dedicating an entire vessel to healing was alien. Medical treatment was efficient, and utilitarian wounded warriors were either quickly repaired or discarded based on their utility to the hegemony. The idea of an entire ship devoted to such activities seemed not just wasteful, but incomprehensible. "Respond," he commanded. "Tell them they are now subjects of the Zephyrian hegemony and must prepare for boarding and inspection." The human reply came with the same unsettling promptness. "We understand your position, Commander Vextall. However, we are currently treating critical patients from multiple species and cannot safely power down our medical systems. We're transmitting our ship's manifest and medical logs for your review. Perhaps we can find a solution that serves both our needs." Vextall's compound eyes widened. The humans had not only identified his rank, but had done so without any formal introduction. The data package they transmitted was extensive, detailed medical records, personnel files, and what appeared to be treatment protocols for dozens of different alien physiologies. "How did they know my name?" he demanded his intelligence officer. A nervous creature named Plixton skittered forward. "Commander, these medical logs, they contain detailed biological data on 17 different species, including our own. Look at this. Complete Zephyrian genetic sequences, metabolic analysis, psychological profiles. The implications hit the bridge crew like a physical blow. The humans possessed intimate knowledge of Zephyrian biology, information that should have been impossible for a primitive species to obtain. More disturbing still, their medical records showed they had been treating members of various species that the hegemony had conquered, enslaved, or displaced. "Sir," Plixton continued, his voice trembling, "according to these logs, they've been operating in this region for over a decade. They have detailed records of our expansion campaigns, our biological weapons, our conquest strategies." Vextall felt the first stirring of something he hadn't experienced in years: uncertainty. The primitive ship hanging before them suddenly seemed less like easy prey and more like a puzzle box filled with uncomfortable secrets. "Deploy standard conquest formation," he ordered, his voice betraying none of his growing unease. "If they want to play at being healers, we'll show them what real power looks like." But as his fleet moved into position around the human vessel, Vextall couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far more complex than a simple first contact scenario. The Dauntless waited in the void, its red crosses gleaming under the light of distant stars, broadcasting medical data with the persistence of a species that had learned to see opportunity in every crisis. They were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who refuses to fight on your terms.